Protests are erupting in Syria over the burning of a Christmas tree. Video posted on social media shows that tree on fire in a Christian-majority town. Now demonstrators are calling for the new Islamist government to protect minorities. As a Syrian news outlet reports, the government will recognize Christmas Day and Boxing Day as national holidays. The new government has also announced multiple rebel factions have agreed to integrate under a centralized defense ministry after the ouster of dictator Bashar al-Assad. The executive director of the Syrian Emergency Task Force, Mouaz Moustafa, joins me now, having just returned from Syria. Mouaz, thanks for coming on. There have been a lot of concerns about potential ethnic violence and unrest under this new Syrian government. So how do you think it's going so far? And what are you watching for as these rebel groups join forces?
Well, from day one, the first 2 days, now a couple of weeks ago, when Aleppo was liberated, what we were doing is we were calling with the Bishop of Aleppo, and he was the top sort of representative for the Syrian Catholics in Syria, Eastern Orthodox priests, the Armenians, the Kurds, just to make sure how are things going, especially with minority groups. Frankly, there has been very little reports of violations, and when there were, they were quickly handled. For example, the Christmas tree that you mentioned in a town in Hama province, the new government has already went to the side, of course, extinguishing the fire, and made clear that whoever is responsible for it, regardless of who they are, their rank, etc., will be dealt with and held accountable to the greatest extent of the law. So what I have seen, being on the ground in Aleppo, in Hama, and Homs, and Idlib, and in Damascus itself for a majority of the time, is Christmas decorations and people of all types, from Muslims to Christians to Arabs to Kurds, in the streets celebrating for the first time Iran, Russia, and the Assad regime, which has held this terror and terrifying security state, is no more. That's why we're able to search for American citizens, for example, on the ground.
Now, during your trip, you were searching for American journalist Austin Tice. Now, you didn't find him, but you did find another American, Travis Timmerman. How did that happen?
Well, the United States government, SETF, we're aware of 6 Americans that were detained by the Assad regime that, God willing, are still alive, or we don't know if they're alive or dead. That includes Meshed Kamalmaz and Austin Tice, and so our priority continues to be to try to find out where they are and bring them home, God willing, alive. And if they're not, still, they need to come home and be with their families. Travis had told his family that he was going to be in Europe. He was reported missing in Hungary. The U.S. government, SETF, didn't know that he was, for any reason, in Syria. But he had crossed illegally into Syria over 7 months ago and was arrested by the Assad regime, held in solitary, heard the torture of Syrian women and men and children every day at these intelligence branches that were liberated by the now new government. And of course, thank God, we were able to coordinate both with the U.S. military, with Roger Carsten, and the Special Presidential Envoy for Hostage Affairs, and the new Damascus government. And the new Damascus government gave us a security escort that helped us bring him and hand him to the U.S. military so, he can, go home and be with his family.
So what's being done now to find Austin Tice and other Americans still missing in Syria?
Well, I think it's really, really important that the United States, law enforcement, forensics experts, really, everyone that has the expertise and the ability to help, go through the hundreds of thousands of documents that the Assad regime left behind, and to help, again, go and search these different geolocations. There have been geolocations provided by the U.S. government, others that we have from our network, where Austin could have at one point been held or might be. Same applies for Meshed Kamalmaz and the other Americans who are unnamed because their families have not made their case public. So far, we've not been able to find any of them. That search continues. But again, I think the more that there is a U.S. government presence in coordination with the Damascus government, who is giving us access to everywhere we need to look and see, I think that will help increase the odds of finding some word of what's happening. But since 2012, we've been looking for Austin. Since 2017 for Meshed Kamalmaz. The Assad regime is a horrible regime and very secretive. And God willing, we can find news of him and hopefully find him alive. And like I said, even if these Americans are not God forbid, are not alive, that we still need to find out where they are and bring their remains home.
Now, during your trip, you also visited some mass grave sites. What did you make of what you saw there? And how do you think Syria moves forward after more than 5 decades of rule by the Assad family?
I have been very aware of the Assad's war crimes, working with the Caesar file and SETF organization being a custodian of that file, identifying and working with some of these grave diggers and who helped us find out where these mass graves were back in 2021. Going there in person and seeing these intelligence branches, seeing these mass graves that contain hundreds of thousands of bodies of men, women, children, elderly, people that had nothing to do with anything, just shows how the crimes committed by the Assad regime with the aid of Russia and Iran have been the worst crimes by far of the 21st century. The fact that there are so many missing people whose families still seek and search for news for are most likely in these horrific, mass graves and have perished in these horrific dungeons and concentration camps, including my own family and friends, is really something that is staggering. And that is why it is important. Look, the international community did nothing to help Syria liberate itself from this tyrant. The Syrians did it on their own. And that's a wonderful thing. But out of shame, at least, the international community should be sending convoys of people that know how to deal with DNA sampling to give closure to families and start the accountability process. There needs to be folks that help us with the chain of custody and preservation of evidence, people that are expert at exhuming mass graves and going through that sort of work, that have worked in Srebrenica or in Ukraine. That's what Syria deserves, people that come in and help us now forge our way towards a democratic republic. Syria is the only Arab country in the world that is closer to a democracy by far than any other Arab country. That's a wonderful thing that should be supported by democracies, including the United States.
All right, Executive Director of the Syrian Emergency Task Force, Mouaz Moustafa, we appreciate your time today. Thank you.
Thanks for having me.